It says, then the king shall do according to his own will, and he shall exalt. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, and he shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. And he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign God, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and divide the land for gain. And at that time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. And he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. And he shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. And he shall have power over the treasure of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him, for he shall go in fury to, and he shall plant of his in the seas and the glory, yet he shall come to his end. Is my thing cutting out? Yeah, the handheld. All right, you guys can grab. So if you guys remember from our quick previous study from 2 weeks ago, I guess, and then like our last study of beginning of chapter 11 from about like a month ago, the beginning of chapter 11 was prophecy from Daniel, but after Daniel's time, but before our time, if you guys remember this. So it's history to us, but it was a future event for Daniel. Now, as we get into this latter half of the chapter for this study, we are looking at prophecy again, but now future events for us. It's not history for anyone. So this is something that we're looking at when it comes to the Antichrist, when it comes to the tribulation time, the tribulation period. On? Oh, there it is. Now, one thing that when I was thinking about this and I was studying this, how many of you guys, besides what we've studied so far when it comes to end times, when it comes to the 7 years of tribulation, how many of you guys are kind of have like a basic understanding and knowledge of what is about to transpire? Like, I'm not asking you to be like biblical scholars on this because I'm not either, but just like the basic of basics. Okay, that's good to know. Um, I think for a lot of us, it is going to seem scary, overwhelming. Um, it almost it can almost feel as it can feel like defeating. It can feel like it could bring anxiety and fear and all these things. And one thing I want to encourage you with, it was a couple things. One is I want to look at the end. Okay, so let's look at the end. Do you guys ever read books and before you even like start, you read the last like page? Anyone do that? All right, I do that. So I'll read the last page. I want to, okay, maybe I'll get like a chapter in, and I'm like, okay, I'm intrigued, but I want to know what happens in the end, right? So I'll read like I'll pretend like I'm not going to read it like intently, but I'll read it, and then that way I know. Even same thing with like movies or Dateline or 60 Minutes, like some crime scene drama type stuff, especially like nonfiction stuff. I want to know like what transpired. So 5 minutes into the show, what I'll do is I'll go see what happens in the end. Did the husband do it? Right? Did so and so do it? Did he get caught? Is he in jail? What happened? So I look at that. I like to know what happens in the end. For us as Christians, we know what the end is going to be. And I think we need to skip all of this for the time being, and let's look at the end, and then we'll go look at everything that's going to transpire, because that's the most important thing. So we read in verse 45, the ending, okay? It says this, and he shall plant the tents of his palace, speaking of the Antichrist, between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. So this is part of the end, is that we can oftentimes get caught up with thinking and feeling so defeated and overwhelmed with evil that we question and we ask the Lord, why is it prevailing? Why do you allow evil to prevail? I mean, think of the time that we live in. Think of the things that are transpiring in the world, with there's so much evil. There's so much evil within the world and wickedness. With the higher ups, with the governments, with ordinary people, the things that we are allowing, the things that are happening, we are becoming more and more like the days of Noah. We are becoming more and more like the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. That the things that were once, you know, kind of taboo, the things that were kind of once, you would never talk about, you'd never speak about, you would never do out in the open, is now becoming out in the open, just like it was in the days of Noah and the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so it's becoming more evil and more wicked. And then I start to think, well, Lord, like, you ever thought like why Satan is around? Like why God didn't just completely annihilate him? Have you ever wondered that? Have you ever wondered why God even allows the Antichrist to even come on the scene? Like why would he allow the Antichrist to come on the scene and allow all this destruction and pain and hurt? Why would he allow why it can feel like evil just continues to prevail. Why does he do that? Why does he allow that? And I think that is a fantastic question that I don't know the certainty or the fullness of that answer. But what I do know is that God does allow these things for good. And it's so hard to understand sometimes. But I think what happens is when God allows Satan to do what he does, and remember, God doesn't allow anything to happen apart from his will. And so especially with Satan, Satan's, for a lack of a better way to describe it, is like on a leash. Right? He can only do what God allows him to do. But God does allow him to do stuff. Right? We're going to see the Antichrist come on the scene. We're going to see the persecution specifically of Jews and Christians. That there's specifically for you and I as believers, there's going to be specific persecution to that, not because we're American, not because we're this, not because we're that, but specifically because you say that you are a Christian and you live the Christian life. So why does God allow that? And there's multiple reasons. One, I think, again, I said, is that good comes from it. And what good? Well, one, I believe that God gets the glory. God gets the glory. And two, I think it's to purify us, is to refine us, is to strengthen us. And I thought to myself, God, you are so good. Would I still understand your goodness and your love apart from all of this happening? And I think I would, but I also know myself. And I also know human beings and how we become complacent and how when things are going good, we kind of forsake God. When things are comfortable, when things are easy, we kind of forsake him. That our faith is very weak and minimal at that point. And I think God allows certain things to happen in our life to strengthen us, to refine us, to purify us, because ultimately Christ is our bridegroom and we are his bride, and he wants to present us pure and undefiled and spotless. And part of the persecution, part of the evil, part of the wickedness that comes about is to do that, is to purify and strengthen us and to present us undefiled. Because through faith and the strengthening and refining of our faith, God can do that. So I don't know if that's the greatest of answers, but that's part of an answer. And so as we read this and you think, the end times, in these 7 years, and how, the Antichrist is going to prevail for so long, and how he's going to do all these things, and he's going to persecute the church, and he's going to, or the, not the church, but Christians, he's going to persecute Jews. And it's like, God, why? Like, why would you do that? And again, it's for all those very reasons. And the last thing is that we know the ending. We know the beginning and we know the ending, right? From the very beginning, God, Jesus Christ, has been victorious, right? The fact that he made the demons, the principalities, he put them to shame, and he made a spectacle of them by dying upon the cross and defeating them, by defeating death and sin. So from that standpoint, we already are victorious. that Satan has already lost, that evil has already lost, even though it may seem as if it's going to prevail. Jesus has already won. And then we look at the ending and we see that Jesus has won, right? And that he's going to establish his kingdom, like we've been reading in Daniel, that all these different kingdoms are going to come along and all of them are going to fail, all of them are going to crumble. Yet God's kingdom, he's going to establish in its finality in the end, and he's going to be victorious, that no one and nothing can withstand him. And listen, I want to be on the winning side. And Paul says that too. He's like, I want to run the race and I want to run it well. I want to finish well. I'm going to fight the good fight. Right? He knew above all how difficult this life can be, yet he still fought the fight and he ran the race and he finished well. And that's what we have to do. We have to finish well. It's not just how we start in our teenage years, but it's in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, however long you live, to finish well and to do well. And to know that in the end, we're going to be on the victorious side. We are on the victorious side already, but in the end, we're going to see its finality as we are the victors through Jesus Christ. So verse 36, let's look at this as we break it down a little bit more in depth. It says, then the king shall do according to his own will, and he shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. And he shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. Now, again, we've transitioned from verse 35 to 36 to now a future date for us in the 21st century, a prophecy that is yet to be fulfilled, something that is going to happen later on, whether it's in our lifetimes or beyond our lifetime, we don't know. But what we do see is that this could not have been fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes, who we studied in the previous section of chapter 11. So what we come to find out is that this king is not him, referring to here in verse 36, but this king is the Antichrist. He is, as Daniel described him in a dream, the little horn, right, from Daniel chapter 7, or in Daniel chapter 9, who he calls him the prince to come. We've got different names, different pictures for who he is, but ultimately it's one person. He is the Antichrist. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, it says, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, even in Revelation chapter 13, he is called the beast, who is indwelt by Satan himself. And he is the one who is given authority by the 10 kings that we will see, or that we see in Revelation chapter 17. So in the end times, there's going to be a king, right? There's going to be this king. And as we've looked through chapter 11, we saw multiple mentions of kings, two specific ones. We saw the king of the north and the king of the south. You guys remember this? And how it kind of alternated who those were. It wasn't one specific person, but it was this guy, and then that guy died, and then his son was the king, and then he's the king of the north. Now, when it comes to king of the north and king of the south, it's a reference to geography. It's to where they are in concordance with Israel. So anything north of Israel, that was the king of the north. Anything south of Israel, that was the king of the south. But this king specifically here is neither of those, but it is the Antichrist. Let's keep going with this. So it says, the king shall do according to his own will. What does that sound like? Does that sound like someone who follows the Lord? No? Does it sound like what we read of in the Old Testament? Everyone did everything. What does it say? They did everything that was right in their own eyes, right? Anytime that we as men do things that we deem or seem as right in our own eyes, is not going to end well. It's not going to be good if we do according to our own will. Even Jesus Christ, who came, did not do according to his own will. Right? 3 times he prayed to the Father, not my will, but your will be done. So this is the opposite of what the Father wants for us. He does according to his own will. What does he do? And we see this, again, the complete opposite of Christ. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every God. Every God. So now we see his arrogance and his pride on display. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 25, when it was speaking of the Antichrist to come, it says that he shall exalt himself in his heart. right? The very same spirit of Satan, of Lucifer, right? Because what did he do to cause himself to be puffed up? He exalted himself to be like God or to be greater than God, want to be greater than God. And so we have to be very careful that we don't allow the exaltation of ourselves to build us up and to puff us up and to not let it go further than it is, because it is the spirit of the Antichrist. It is not the spirit of Christ. It is not the spirit of God. So not only will he set himself over all other people, but he's going to exalt and magnify himself above every God. He's going to be so engrossed in the thought of his own deity that he's actually going to break the very 7-year covenant that brought him into power. If we see in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it says, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, we're going to see the abomination of desolation, where it says that he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering." And what does it mean for him to bring an end to the sacrifice and offering? Is because no longer is a sacrifice and offering given unto the Lord, but now he wants it unto himself. He himself wants to be worshiped. And Paul actually explains this in more detail in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. He says, "Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." So he is, at this point in time, during the 7-year tribulation, is going to enter the temple of God and then claim to be God. Doesn't that sound crazy? Now, like in our minds right now, we'd be like, dude, if anyone were to do that, I'd be like, that's absolutely ridiculous. But here's the thing. So many people are going to fall for it. So many people are going to be deceived by this. So he's going to walk in and claim to be God. What else is he going to do? Is he's going to do according to his own will? Not only is he going to exalt and magnify himself above every other God, but here we see in verse 36, he's going to speak blasphemies against the God of gods, against the King of kings, against the Lord of lords. The scripture is abundantly clear in pointing out about the Antichrist and his big blasphemous mouth. We've read this already in Daniel chapter 7, in chapter 7, verses 8, 11, and 20, in Daniel chapter 8, where he speaks these boastful things as he utters these blasphemies against the Most High. In Revelation chapter 13, it says in verses 5 and 6, "And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven." If God is not a God with self-control, it's not more evident than it is in this point. This man is going to arrogantly, pridefully blaspheme God, the name of God, his temple, and those who are in heaven with him. He's going to deny the very existence of any God but himself, that he is the only God. In John, 1 John chapter 2, he says this in verse 22, "Who is a liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist who denies the Father and the Son." I think if we were around, it's going to be very evident that this is the Antichrist, the one who is blatantly going to set himself up as God and then deny the very existence of the one true God, along with blaspheming him in his name. But again, in verse 36, let's look at this. It says, "He shall prosper." And that's going to be the hard part for some of us that we have to reconcile, is that he shall prosper, but till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been done shall be done. Here's the thing. He's going to prosper, but he's not going to prosper forever. That's the good thing. Verse 37. It says, "He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all." So there's two ways of looking at this for a couple points here. This first point where he says that he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, it could be a suggestion that hints at the Antichrist being Jewish, but a non-practicing Jew. That is one suggestion. Now, as we go through this, I need you to understand too that we are not going to get this 100% right. Okay, so we are doing our best, I want to say guesses, but our best educational uh, guesstimates of what is going to transpire as we not translate this. What's the word I'm looking for? Um, interpret. Thank you. Interpret this. So I will stand up here and tell you that for sure, I don't know with certainty if this is exactly it. So we got to look at it a few different ways, but there are certain things that we know for certainty that this is the Antichrist. So again, it could be that he is Jewish, but maybe a non-practicing Jew. It could be that he is a non-religious man, um, which is pretty much a lot of our world. Who knows? But in some way or another, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, and the second point, nor the desire of women. Now, I think this one is difficult to interpret, the desire of women, because there's different ways you can look at this. There are some who believe that the Antichrist will be homosexual, since it says that he does not have a desire for women. This could be the case, but we can't be certain, right? Um, but first of all, it literally says that he shows no regard for the desire of women. So this could mean anything from homosexuality to abstinence to even just maybe he's a leader that doesn't allow, his soldiers to go home and be with their family, their wives. It could be something as simple as that. Um, but to even add more confusion to how we can interpret this, the desire of women could actually be a title of the Messiah, since historically it was the desire of every Hebrew woman to be the mother of the Messiah. So there's different ways to interpret that. But I think what we can come to understand is that when these things transpire, I think it's going to be obvious as to what it means, right? Like if perchance we were there hypothetically, and whatever transpires, and we have these scriptures, and we can say, okay, that's where this fits, right? Right now we don't have a certainty to it. So let's keep going. Verse 38. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. So we see from verse 37 and 38 that he does not regard any God, right? Whether it is the true God or false God. Instead, he proclaims that he himself is God, and that he is a God of power and force, and possibly what we can come to see is military might. That he's going to have this fortress and fortresses, but he's going to honor a God of fortresses with gold and silver. So whatever this God is, whether it is even him himself, he's going to honor it by spending a lot on it. A lot on it. Verse 39. And thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign God, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So he's going to act against the strongest fortresses. So the Antichrist will take on the world with the help of his God, and he won't be afraid to challenge anyone anyone, whether the strongest of nations. He is not afraid to go up against them. And John tells us in Revelation that the Antichrist is connected to Satan himself and causes the world to worship Satan, who is this foreign god here in verse 38. Revelation 13:4 says, so they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So there is a connection here between the worshiping of Satan and the waging of war. Okay? Again, but in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign God, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So here in verse 39, in the middle part of it, it says, which he shall acknowledge. In my version, how many of you guys are reading the New King James? Okay, majority of us. It sounds as if the Antichrist is going to acknowledge and basically advance the kingdom and the cause of Satan. Some other translations, like the ESV, the English Standard Version, It says it this way. It says, those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor, and he shall make them rulers over many, and he shall divide the land for a price. So there's two ways that this could transpire. It could be something where he advances, and it maybe could be one and the same, but by advancing the cause and the kingdom of Satan is one way to look at it. And or basically, if you honor the Antichrist, that he will honor you. If you join his team, he's going to bless you. Something like that, right? So again, the ESV says, those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor, and he shall make them rulers over many, and he shall divide the land for a price. So I can only assume that if you were to not join him, if you were to not acknowledge him, that there would be something different than honor that you would gain or not gain. But he says here in the end of verse 39, that he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So in this time, what he's going to do, because right now in 2024, one of the biggest issues that we see in the Middle East is territorial lines, right? Especially with Israel, especially with Palestine, right? How do we divide up the land? Whose is it, right? Who's the original owner, or whatever you want to call it, right? That's what people would say. Who's the rightful owner of the land? Who should hold it? How much of the land should be given to the Palestinians? Should the Palestinians be allowed to have their own separate nation? And then who does the city of Jerusalem belong to? So all these different things that are being fought over and argued over, and war is being waged. One thing that we're going to see here in verse 39 in this time is that he's going to divide the land for gain. So one way that we can look at this is that possibly the Antichrist is going to figure out how to pull this off, how to divide the land and prosper from it. It'll be interesting. Verse 40. And at that time, at the end of the king, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. So because we see here Daniel's telling us at the end of the time, at the time of the end, this is relating to the tribulation and the end, the latter half of it. Okay. So this is taking place during the last half of the tribulation. And it says that the king of the south shall attack. Now, up until verse 36, the king of the south was always referred to the ruler who was up in Egypt, in that territory. And the king of the north was referred to the ruler in Syria, so north of Israel. Now, north and south are relatively based, well, as they were, to their geographical position to Israel. And I still think this connection to Israel holds, but we can't stay handcuffed to the north being Syria and to the south being Egypt. So there's two ways that we can figure out or understand who the king of the south is and who the king of the north is. So first, Daniel says here that the king of the south shall attack him. Who is him? Is it the king of the north or is it the Antichrist? The him here will still refer to the king of the north because of context, but this is no longer the king of Syria. This is now the Antichrist, the ruler of the revived Roman Empire. Or both the south and the north attack the Antichrist. And so simultaneously, they will attack the ruler, the little horn, during this time. There's multiple ways that you can interpret this. But what we see is that he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. And in verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land. What is the glorious land? Is it America? No. What is it? Israel, right? And he has this peace treaty already with Israel. So he's going to respond to help Israel, bring his troops into Israel. But what are we going to see here? Many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. So the Antichrist is not going to cross into the Jordan. He's going to stay in Israel. And it's at this halfway mark in the tribulation when he's going to set up himself as God in the temple, the abomination of desolation. We talked about that. But Jesus says that when this occurs, the Jews living in Israel at that time need to head for the hills. And if you remember this, in Matthew chapter 24, and even as we studied through in John, we saw it as well, he says this. He says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So the mountains that Jesus is actually referring to are the east of the Jordan, which is the land of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. So we see how these two tie in together here, as the Antichrist is going to overthrow, and these people are going to escape Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon, just as Jesus said and warned them to do. In verse 42, it says, he shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, and he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also, the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heel. So the Antichrist is going to attack Egypt and succeed in conquering. He's going to plunder the treasures of Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. But in verse 44, news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore, he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and annihilate many. So he's going to hear these rumblings of these rumors from the east and north, and it's going to cause him conflict. It's going to trouble him to the point where he's going to return back to his headquarters in Jerusalem and begin a worldwide persecution of Jews and Christians. And in verse 45, we're coming to a close here, it says, he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. So the seas here is a reference to the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea. And the holy mountain is Mount Moriah, which is in Jerusalem. And it's here that the Antichrist is going to be defeated, which we actually see happening and transpiring in Zechariah chapter 14 and Revelation chapter 19. But the good news, this is the good news in all of it, is that all this is going to transpire. Just as Daniel's predicted and foretold, just as Jesus has prophesied, it's all going to transpire one day. But the good news is that he, speaking of the Antichrist, shall come to his end. That there will be a time when God sets up his kingdom, when Satan is going to be cast into the lake of fire, where there will be no more evil, where there will be no more pain, where there will be none of the things that our sin has brought into this world. I mean, can you like literally imagine that for a moment? Imagine the best day of your life. It's going to be way better than that. Like, it just blows my mind. And God's going to be in the midst of all of it. He is going to be the king, the rightful king, the true king. And the thing too is he's going to come back as a conquering king, and he's going to do so. So it says again, he will come to his end. This blasphemous, murderous man who's going to one day basically rule the world, but he will come to an end. Just like we saw with every single kingdom through Daniel's time. Right? The greatest of kingdoms to ever exist, Babylon. With the most powerful man to have ever exist, Nebuchadnezzar. And do we even see remnants of it anymore? No. Do you remember what happened in that dream with the big statue? Do you remember what happens to it in the end? It gets crushed by what? A stone. But what was the stone described as? Huh? That's what it refers to, but it described it as like a unique stone. It said it literally was it was not made by man's hands. Right? A reference to deity, a reference to the creator, a reference to God, to Christ. That he is going to establish his kingdom, and he's going to persevere in a kingdom that will never end, just like we see all these other kingdoms that do end and have an ending to it. Christ doesn't. And so the Antichrist is going to receive what he deserves. And John says this in Revelation chapter 19. We'll close here. In verse 19 and 20, it says, and I saw the beast, The kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. And these two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. And so there will come an end when God will not allow them to wander, but to capture them and to cast them into the lake of fire. And there will be a literal end to them. And God is going to prevail, and he is going to be the king for eternity. And it's a beautiful and wonderful thing to hope for. And I think that's, one of the things that we see throughout scripture is there's always hope, right? In Christ, there's always hope. And it's a hope that doesn't have doubt filled with it. Like, like right now, I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. Do you know why? Or that it's cold. I hope it's not going to be cold. I hope it's not going to rain. But it's a hope that's filled with doubt, because I know that, like, in the back of my mind, it probably is going to be cold and rainy tomorrow. Maybe not, but it's going to be cold and sunny at least. But when it comes to Christ, it's a hope that has no doubt attached to it. It's a hope of certainty, a surety, right? And so we have this hope in Christ. And so whatever we're going through, we're going to prevail because we're his. 2 Corinthians 4:16 says this, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." And if you can learn this at a young age, you are going to set yourself up to do so well, to understand that there is more to this life than what we see, that there's more to this life than the temporary, but that God is perfecting us and God is working on us for the things that are not seen and for the things that are eternal, and preparing us for that. Because this life is just it's a blip, it's just a moment in time. 70 years compared to eternity is practically nothing, you know. And yet God also doesn't just leave us here to figure it out for 70 years. He's with us, he guides us, he indwells with us through the Holy Spirit. And he wants us to grow and to know him even further, as much as possible, to the point where we can know him in perfection when we stand before him.